Les fonctionnaires, les leaders d'opinion et les spécialistes à l'échelle canadienne réfléchissent aux idées qui façonnent la fonction publique. Le leadership, les politiques, la gouvernance, l'innovation et bien plus encore. Voici la série Analyse et réflexions, réalisée par l'École de la fonction publique du Canada.
Welcome to another session of the Review and Reflections series, where we highlight interesting and prominent Canadians, and we talk a little bit about them and a little bit about their achievements so that you get to know your country a little bit better. Today we are talking to a living legend. We are talking to P. Thomas Jenkins. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
What's the P stand for?
Paul.
Paul. How
Yes.
come you went with Thomas or Tom?
My parents had a disagreement as to what they were going to call me, so I ended up being called Tommy instead of Paul. It was two different grandfathers, and it ended up being Tommy. And it's, of course, if you have to navigate a passport, it's a bit of a curse because they call you Paul. And then you sit around going, where's Paul? And then, of course, they go Paul Thomas, and then you show up. So it's a bit of a curse. So a note to everyone listening, don't name your children after their second name. Stick to the first name.
And where were you born, Tom?
I was born in Hamilton, Ontario.
What was Hamilton like back then?
Hamilton's a steel town, so it was blue collar. And it was people there told you what they thought. You went to Hamilton Ticat games, and you know, it was a very straightforward town. When I went to university at Toronto, it was much more difficult to navigate because people didn't exactly tell you what they thought. In Hamilton, you never had to guess.
Were you a Ticats fan or an Argo fan?
You said "were" as in past tense. I am still, to this day, a long-suffering Hamilton Ticats fan. In fact, Tikey, I was born on Grey Cup Day.
Wow. And I know that you are also, speaking of long-suffering, you are also a long-suffering, like me, Toronto Maple Leaf fan.
Yeah, this is going to be a very difficult session. We've now covered the Hamilton Ticats and unfortunately the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yes.
And you have something that I wish I had from the Toronto Maple Leafs, somewhere in your basement, I'm told. What is it?
Oh, we're really going to talk about stuff here. Well, when the Maple Leaf Gardens was being dismantled and reassembled, all of the artifacts of the Toronto Maple Leafs were auctioned off, and I won the bid for the players' dressing room.
Wow. What's in the players' dressing room?
The stuff that everyone knows from every hockey rink, the door, and the players' bench and stalls and what have you.
Holy smokes. So,
But I also have something else.
what do you have?
I have the players' bench from the Montreal Forum.
Oh, boo.
And
Montreal,
of course, I tell all my Montreal friends that when Toronto wins the Stanley Cup, that I will burn in a bonfire the players' bench, the Beliveau, and of course, the response of the Habs fans has always been, oh, you're only going to burn it when the Leafs win the Stanley Cup? It's in safe hands.
Oh, and as we speak, for the irate Montreal Canadiens fans right now that are listening to this, as we speak, you should know that the Toronto Maple Leafs did not make the playoffs, and the Montreal Canadiens are still in the playoffs. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. What'd your mom do? What'd your dad do?
My mother was a British war bride. My father landed at D-Day, and on furlough from the Canadian Army, he met my mother. And so my father was born and bred in Hamilton. In fact, comes from, as far back as I've gotten now, 12 generations of Army and engineers, believe it or not. My fifth great-grandfather built the fort at Burlington Heights, which became Dundurn Castle. And it's during the War of 1812. That's how I ended up in Hamilton, because Color Sergeant John Jenkins of the Royal Engineers had to rebuild and build forts for the War of 1812.
So that's interesting because it kind of talks about, or it foreshadows a couple of the themes of your kind of your public life. So the first is you have a relationship with the Canadian Armed Forces that continues to this day. Tell us about kind of the beginning of your Canadian Armed Forces Association and how it's gone over the years.
Well, my father landed at D-Day with the Army, and when it was time for me to put a uniform on, he said, "You're going into the Air Force." So I ended up as an Air Force officer, and that's how the association. And today I sit on the Air Board of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
What does it mean to you to still have an association with our military?
Well, it means everything to me. It's part of our heritage. It's who we are, what we have done. I had the great honor to write the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force history book with General Mike Hood, the commander, and it's called Pathway to the Stars. And it's a wonderful read. For any Canadian, you can't help but be proud of your country when you read what this country has done.
Now, the very first time I heard you speak, and the very first time I met you, it was virtually, when virtual was not a thing. And it was, you were giving a presentation to a leadership program in the Government of Canada. And you started talking about, not about your time at OpenText, not about, the many, many things that we all know you for. You spent a lot of your time talking about your time in the Army, and you said a sentence that I had never heard before, and it knocked me off my feet. You said, "The Army taught me how to be a leader from behind."
Yes.
Talk to me about that sentence.
See, in business, we're taught spreadsheets and we're taught things to manage. We're taught to be managers. When I reflected on my career, one of the most important things that I had been taught in officer cadet school was to lead and to be, and I still remember to this day all of the different courses I was on, and you were always taught all of your people ate their meal first, you ate the meal last. This was an ethos of the officer cadre. And many of those principles served me very well in business because it was about leading and about leading from behind. And it's a subtle point, but as I reflected on my career, it became a very important point.
So that's a nice segue into where most Canadians have heard your name, and that's in business, specifically in high tech. You were one of the first people, not just in Canada, but you were one of the first people to kind of grab a hold and make something of this new thing called the World Wide Web or the net, or I don't know what you were calling it back then, but
well,
take us back in time.
It was called the Information Superhighway.
Yeah.
And it was invented by Al Gore's father. Those were the terminologies of the time. Of course, we started to call it the internet, but then it really became known as the web. And the World Wide Web needed something to be able to find the needle in the haystack. And at the time, in the algorithm world, we called that an inverted Boolean index. And of course, that's a mouthful. So people just called it a search engine. And of course, at that time, when I would say to people, well, we build search engines, they thought that was part of a car. So much of the nomenclature we take for granted today.
So talk to us about that world a little bit. If I remember right, it was like Netscape, it was Alta Vista, it was Ask Jeeves. It was, take us back a little bit for those who don't remember the days before the internet.
Well, in those days, we had floppy disks that had 360 kilobytes on it. And in the first year we crawled the entire internet, it was the sum total, the whole World Wide Web was 1 gigabyte.
Which is what in like ordinary language today? Is it like on my smartphone?
Oh my goodness, a thumb drive or something like that. that would have a terabyte on it now. No, a gigabyte is an afterthought today. But at the time, a gigabyte memory on a VAX 11750 cost $35 million, roughly, and filled a room. Those were the early days of the internet.
Now, when people were running off on the internet, you actually started working on kind of the alter ego of the internet, the intranet. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, it was a typical Canadian moment. At the time, we were running, for about 3 years in a row, the Open Text Index was pre-Google, pre-Bing, and in fact, was the search engine of Netscape and Microsoft Network and what have you. But so many different companies were coming into that race. It became a very consumer-oriented thing. So we, being Canadian and not in New York City or Los Angeles and not wanting to move to New York City or Los Angeles, decided that from Waterloo, Ontario, maybe the best play would be to go behind what is called the firewall, which meant that we started to build the search engines inside the firewall of every company and government of the world.
So that they could find their information, they could sort their information, they could use their information for business applications, business intelligence.
Yeah, that's correct. And what happened was we ended up writing a book about it called Enterprise Content Management, which became the name for the industry, which is today a multi-billion dollar multinational industry. And that's exactly right. We started to help people discover the needles in their own haystack as opposed to public. What we didn't know, which we know today, but we didn't know at the time, a lot of people would be very surprised to hear that whether it's Google or Facebook or whatever, that's only 2% of the information in the world. We hadn't realized that we were stumbling on an iceberg and that what we could see publicly was a fraction. Do you know, for the first 10 years of the internet, Boeing, their internal internet was bigger than the public internet because of all the technical manuals of all the airline, etc.
That's remarkable. And it gives us a sense of kind of scale and how exponentially in explosive terms both the internet and various intranets have become. Now, when you say we, it's Open Text, which you've been associated with for, I think, 3 decades.
Yeah.
Open Text, if I remember right, started as some kind of project at the University of Waterloo.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So it began its life at the University of Waterloo. It was basically digitizing the Oxford English Dictionary. And the Oxford English Dictionary was a 640 megabyte huge thing, dozens of books on a shelf, and no one knew how to have digital recall. And so we actually, at the university, designed the algorithm to be able to find the needle in that haystack. And that led to Open Text being founded. So it was a spinoff.
And did you kind of scan? Did you take pictures of the physical Oxford English Dictionary?
Yes, we did. In fact, what we did was, at the time, it was the nascent moment of optical character recognition, where machines were just starting to be able to figure out what a word was, what a letter was. And so we were able to scan in, early days, scan in all the information. And that's actually how I started with Open Text, because I had been at yet another University of Waterloo startup called DALSA. And DALSA was a maker of scanners. And we were scanning so many things, we couldn't find them. And then I realized that the professors that had been designing the Open Text algorithm were onto something much, much more profound.
Now, your association with Open Text has been, I think, 3 decades. You have taken this company that started in Waterloo as an offshoot of kind of a university project, and you have made it one of the Canadian global champions. Talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a Canadian global champion as opposed to just a global champion.
Well, certainly we started above a Dairy Queen in Waterloo, just down from the university, and there was 6 of us. And that was 35 years ago. So the 35th year for OpenText is coming up in a few months. And it's been quite a journey, whether Canadian or not Canadian. Very few companies today. OpenText is about $7.5 billion and about 22,500 people. So Canadian or not, it's quite a journey. But it was wonderful as a Canadian because 98% of all the activity, the revenue of OpenText is actually outside of Canada, and more than 50% is outside North America. So I've had the privilege of traveling the world as a Canadian, presenting different technologies to different organizations, and it's been a spectacular experience.
Now, you yourself have become kind of a Canadian champion. You yourself are, you're kind of, in Olympic terms, you're a flag bearer. Tell us how you started getting interested in that part, because you have had a profound love and involvement of public policy, Canadian public policy, and that doesn't seem to be typical in Canada of the business class.
Members of the business community do get involved. It's very difficult because you're busy. So what happened with me was I had started very young. And after being a CEO for 20 years, and the average length of a CEO on NASDAQ is about 36 months. So after 20 years, it was sort of, I was interested in doing something else. And because I had been in the Army, I'd been in the Air Force, and I had always been very devoted to doing things for the public good, it was a natural thing. Kevin Lynch, one of our great clerks and public servants, basically got to know me because Kevin was one of the members of the service that believed in getting outside of Ottawa. And so I got to know him and John Manley, Minister of Industry at the time, and started working with them. And then was asked by Jim Flaherty, our Minister of Finance, and by the Prime Minister at the time, Stephen Harper, to start joining commissions. And I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Red Wilson. And Red Wilson just passed away this year, and he and Richard Dzerny were wonderful, wonderful mentors.
So the thing that you're most well known for in the public policy sphere has been kind of the one big word, and that one big word is innovation. And it seems to have been bedeviling us as Canadians. I know I've been in the public service for 29 years. If there is one word that has been a constant throughout that whole period, it has been innovation. Tell us a little bit from your perspective what you think we get right in public policy vis-a-vis innovation, and what you think maybe we're not getting as right vis-a-vis that word.
Yeah, it's been part of our public policy discourse for the better part of 30 years. Part of the issue is structural for Canada. Canada, as Richard Dzerny would always tell me, is really 2 engines. One engine in the East was manufacturing in that era, and the engine in the West was natural resources. That gives a country a bit of a dilemma, because most countries that have 2 engines like that, and there are several to compare to, Australia being one, when you have such deep riches and blessing as a nation, to have the blessing of those resources, you tend to not have to work as hard, let's say, on the other part of your economy. Now, that, of course, is a dangerous thing to do, and various governments over the years have done their best to arrest it. If you were to unpack that from a policy point of view and look specifically at the productivity, shall we say, our international players, whether it's an OpenText or a Linamar we're as good as anyone in the world. Our innovation, because by definition, we would not survive if we weren't. So when you look and isolate it, but we have another sort of artifact, if you will, because we are associated with the largest economy in the world to the south of our border. That has led us to create protected sectors. Whenever you create a protected sector, and you do that to maintain your sovereignty, your national identity, when you do that, that constrains competition, which then constrains innovation. So it's a bit of a complicated story. It's sort of a three-legged stool, if you will. We have natural resources, we have manufacturing, but then we have industries that by public policy, and all Canadians want us to, is to maintain those as sovereign.
Is it fair to say that being next door to that big economic market and having a very large natural resource endowment and having several key sectors of our economy like telecommunications and banking be kind of protected industries. Is it fair to say that we're maybe a little bit more complacent than we otherwise would be?
I think if you were to talk to an entrepreneur or a business person, none of them would consider themselves complacent because they have to compete. So, but on a macro level, one would be led to such a conclusion. But if you go to an individual who's working quite hard inside any organization, they do not feel complacent, I assure you. But it is an artifact, without a doubt, of the bounty that Canadians have. We are one of the most blessed countries in the world.
Now, fast forwarding a little bit, you mentioned sovereignty, which is now suddenly on the tip of everyone's tongue in Canada. And in other countries around the world, that's kind of now, in some ways, we are exiting the era of globalization. We are slowing down in the era of globalization. Our Prime Minister has called it a rupturing of kind of previous relationships. One of the things now that you and others are talking a lot about is sovereign AI. Talk to us about why we should care about sovereign AI. First, tell us what it is, and then tell us why we should care.
Well, I think the macro framing of this is we're really moving from neoliberalism to neo-royalism, to quote Foreign Affairs magazine from last month. And so one should think about this as an evolutionary step for the world because we are multipolar. We're not dealing with one superpower anymore. So one has to frame it first that way. And then secondly, one has to be so appreciative and thankful that we have a fantastic ally right beside us. The Americans are not a problem. They're a fantastic benefit for us. Having said that, we are allies, not a colony. And you know, when you look at the alliances over the century, especially this past century, strong allies are very good for America, for Britain, for France, etc. So there's no question there. So if you take it from a framing that we're an ally of America, that then implies that we should also be sovereign and that we should choose to be in an alliance with them. So that then leads to a more subtle definition of sovereignty because we want to share our security with the Americans, for sure. So we don't need to be sovereign there. That would be foolish. It's not in our self-interest. So, for example, American hyperscalers, if we wanted to get technical, I think they're absolutely essential to our productivity, and we should be so thankful that we have Microsoft or Google or AWS available to us. That's a wonderful thing. However, we also need to maintain our national identity. And that then compels us to take a hybrid approach where I'll just make it up, say 90% of our activity should be done with a hyperscaler, but 10% should be done at home.
And what is you mentioned 10%, let's use it as the illustrative figure. what types of things would constitute that 10%?
Financial information of an individual or a corporation, the health status, the personal preferences of that individual, their civil rights, those are guarded by the Parliament of Canada. Those are things that should be sovereign. But, when we're making decisions about a TV we're going to buy or something like that, then we should go to Amazon. There should be a balance, not unlike what we were talking about before that previous generations had struck with the protected industries. The generations that came before us knew that telecommunications or banking should be protected to maintain sovereignty. And so what we were talking about before, the three-legged stool, we're just simply carrying that on into the age of AI.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and please correct me if I'm not hearing you correctly, I think you're making a distinction between a type of a data that's kind of, let's call it a commodity, that, you should just kind of be competing like all commodities on the basis of price and efficiency. Like, I don't really care where I get my salt for my driveway. I really want it to be as accessible and as cost-effective as possible. And then on the other hand, something that really matters to us as Canadians, something that has a sensitivity, something that defines us as people that live in Ontario or people that live in Quebec, etc. Is that right?
Oh, you have it. And in fact, we have a tremendous tradition for decades now in legislation of how to govern that. And so in Canada, we have legislation known as PIPEDA. In Europe, they have legislation known as GDPR, and so on. The Americans have the same thing. They have USDR. So all countries have this. This is not unique to Canada. But what is unique is how do countries grapple with AI? And AI is a much more powerful way of interacting with that data. So I think what we'll find all across the world, not just Canada, that legislation throughout the world will simply take the data and move it up into AI, because that's the source of the knowledge of an AI.
You have long been known as somebody that's been working to kind of bring Canada and Germany closer. Tell us a little bit about that.
A particular partnership that OpenText has enjoyed for almost 30 years in the area of data and information sharing has been with the German company SAP of Waldorf in Germany. We have enjoyed one of the historic partnerships in tech for decades. And so we actually are very collaborative together, enjoy a wonderful relationship. And so I've spent a lot of time on the policy side with something called the Atlantic Brücke. My co-chair, Friedrich Merz, is now the Chancellor of Germany, so he was overachieving, and unfortunately I didn't go any further. but the Brücke has been a Canadian-German policy, let's say, common room for decades now.
Now tell us a little bit as we come towards the end. Tell us a little bit about what you see looking ahead as we're sitting here in 2026. The world looks kind of bleak to a lot of us. We see at least 3 wars. We see protectionism. We see tariffs. We see economic sanctions. We see a lot of kind of not particularly on the face of them good things. Tell us what you see a little bit as we sit here in April 2026.
I'm an optimist. I've been an entrepreneur all my life. I've been an optimist. I see on the global level a huge challenge for human beings. All of us, all human beings have to grapple with the fact that machines are coming that are faster and more intelligent than we are. It doesn't make them wiser, it doesn't make them more creative, but we have to redefine what our role is in society adjacent to these machines. And we've always redefined ourselves. Humans are adaptable, but it will be the greatest adaptation challenge so far. And it's a debate among scientists and scholars whether we'll be able to do that. But I'm optimistic. I think we will. I think on the Canadian level, I think Canadians were being challenged to redefine ourselves. But Canadians have done this through its entire history. And I think Canadians will rise to the challenge.
Now, you have worked with prime ministers. You talk with prime ministers. What, if you were talking to prime ministers again, and I'm not saying you don't, but if you were talking to prime ministers again, given your bent for Canadian sovereignty and for Canadian innovation, what would you be telling them about this new world?
If I may, I actually enjoy talking to deputy ministers. As you know, I've always wanted to be a deputy minister my whole career. It's ironic as a CEO.
Do you want to trade? I'm a deputy minister.
Absolutely. I'd love it. I'd love to spend a year in your world because deputy ministers must take the wishes of a prime minister and execute it. It's very complicated because you have to take into account the economics, not just the politics. It's a complex riddle. And so I've always appreciated that. But for a prime minister, and I think we have a fine prime minister right now, I think this prime minister understands the complexity of both the 50,000 feet and the 5-inch off the ground. That's hard to do, to be able to zoom in and zoom out. I really don't have any advice for this prime minister. I think this prime minister has it figured out. The question is can the rest of the country keep up?
Now, let's close with this. Most of the people watching this are public servants. Give us, if you're too humble to give some advice to the prime minister, give a little bit of advice to the rest of us, those that serve under the prime minister and in this system of the public service of Canada.
Deputy ministers, ADMs, they're there as EX level to lead. So lead. It's why they aspired to do it. The deputy minister, the ADM cadre, they're there to lead. You should. The saying in the business is have your resume ready all the time. Speak truth to power, and do the right thing. And it's easy to say, hard to do. But in the DM cadre, that's their job. Their job is to lead, to speak truth to the minister, and to take chances. The single biggest challenge for the service is to overcome risk aversion. And that takes leadership. And I can tell you, in the private sector, we have to do that every day. We have to balance risk with return.
Paul Thomas Jenkins, open text, public policy entrepreneur, deputy minister wannabe, companion of the Order of Canada. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today.
Thank you.